So the sense of touch, I'd like a volunteer if I could to help me do a demonstration. And there'll be lots of objects to pick out from. So don't worry about the coins yet. That'll be the last thing. But try to figure out what each object is by touch before you lift it out. And tell everyone what you think it is before lifting it out.
Without looking at it, right?
Without looking at it. There's nothing going to jump out and grab you.
Feels like a round ball. Right?
Yeah,
Squishy.
okay.
Very squishy.
Mm-hmm.
What's an eye?
My eyeball.
I don't know. Feels like an eraser cap, maybe? Oh, no, it's a shoe.
A shoe. Okay, a boot. But somewhat of a razor shape.
Another round object. So a little line in it. Another circle ball, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. It's a little marble, sort of rubbery. It was. Could you tell it was rubbery?
Yeah, it was rubbery in the field.
And how did you know it was rubbery?
Had some like a slimy texture kind of towards it.
Mm-hmm. But how do you know that slimy wouldn't tell you that it's rubbery?
Oh, it wasn't coarse or didn't have any like a grainy feature.
Okay.
It was smooth.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pencil eraser, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, what makes you think it's a pencil eraser?
Just from memory of it, and the pointy, and there's a circle, like there's an opening on the bottom for where the pencil could be put in, and then the top is kind of pointed like an eraser.
Okay. Good.
God, no clue. I think it's a chair. It's got it has like a top part and 4 legs maybe, and like a little spot to kind of sit on, I guess.
Okay, so it is a chair. So a tiny little chair for my little granddaughter's chair set. So you can recognize objects with your fingers, which is kind of neat.
This one's a dice.
Okay.
You kind of feel the indentations of the numbers and the markings.
Okay, so yeah, you could.
It's a square.
Mm-hmm.
It's got coarse edges. You can kind of see that there's 6, which is a cube. They're not a square, but and the indentations tell me that it's a dice. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yep. There's a couple coins in here.
Okay, so pick out a coin, but before you lift it out, it's Canadian coins. So tell me what the denomination is. Well, what value is it?
There's 2 coins in here, so I can use one for reference.
There's 3.
There's 3. I think the largest one might be a loonie or toonie. I can't really. It's probably a loonie because it's smaller, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. And then the other one would be.
Well, just pick up one and tell me what it is.
Yeah, a loonie.
Okay.
And then I think the other one was a nickel I grabbed.
Okay. And how do you tell it that it's smaller than the previous one?
The size of my hand, the way I grasp it, kind of.
Okay.
It's more. The other one was larger relative to the one I'm holding now. Therefore, it's smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you hold it between your tips like this or inside like that?
Oh, inside too. The way I hold it, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And that goes.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one more coin.
Mm-hmm. One more. That's I love.
Oh yeah, this one's probably a dime because I even hold it smaller.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels lighter to the touch too.
Okay. Can you tell it's thinner?
Oh yeah, it's also thinner as opposed to the dime.
Okay, that's it, I think.
There's one more.
Really?
It might be a shoe, I guess. A seashell.
A seashell. Okay.
That's it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You saw that you can recognize from the touch, you can recognize the smoothness, whether it's rubbery, and also the size, and also what the thing was. So it's much like the visual system, where you can recognize objects. So it must be that the sense of touch has similar pathways that we saw for the sense of vision. It can, take simple features, edges and things like that, and textures, and put them together, and finally be able to detect objects. So let's see how that's done. We start here with see my mouse, with the different receptors we find in your skin. This is the top of the skin, this is deeper in the skin, and you can see here 5 different receptors types. They've all got these funny names. You don't worry about the names because you don't have to remember them. So we had vision. It had 3 types of cones and 1 type of rod. Here we have 5. The first one we're going to look at more details. This one here, this sort of round one. It's called the Basinian receptor. And you can see here the first step in activating it is deformation of your skin. So something presses on your skin. That in turn opens up little channels in your receptor, and that allows sodium to enter the cell. And then, if this point here, which is called the initial segment, that's a bit wider here, if that's below some high enough to be above a threshold, then an action potential is generated. And here you can see this thing called myelin, and it has gaps in it. And so this action potential jumps from gap to gap. And by doing so, it speeds up how fast it travels down this axon. So some axons are myelinated like this, and they're really fast. And then we'll see some aren't, so they're a bit slower. And just FYI, if things like multiple sclerosis, this myelin is disrupted, and so these axons can't pass, and you have motor and sensory disorders in MS. Now, the size, how much activation you get, again, depends on how much pressure you get. So a little bit of pressure won't be felt. A little more will cross this threshold and activate. There's one action potential, and a little bit more still will produce even more action potentials. So the number of action potentials is a clue for how much pressure is being exerted. The other important feature is that these action potentials stop. So they activate for a little while, but then it stops. And that termination is because this potential within the receptor adapts. And some receptors we'll see adapt quickly, like this Basinian afferent, and others will adapt slowly. The other thing is that the number of action potentials, as you increase the pressure, we saw the number of action potentials increase, but at higher levels, it tends to flatten out. Okay? It saturates. And you'll find out in the problem set that this, in fact, is a useful feature. It's not something that is there willy-nilly, but it serves an important function. Now, why does the response adapts? How does it adapt and why? Well, in the case of Basinian afferent, what happens is Basinian afferent is covered with these onion-like lamina. and they sort of slip back to the normal position. So the pressure is exerted, it stays exerted, but these inside lamina return to the shape they normally are. That removes the stretch on the receptor, and the voltage inside drops. So even though the pressure is still on, there's no more action because it's coming down from this receptor. And why does this happen? Well, we saw in the visual system that the brain likes to know what changes rather than what's constant. You don't really care about the pressure of your clothes on your body all the time. You care about something unexpected happening, like a little bug landing on your hand. Now, I mentioned that you have 5 different types of receptors, but on any body part you only have 4, and that's because you have, for example, on the surface of your hand, you have hairs. Most of you have hairs, or some of you have hairs, some have very small hairs, and on the other side, on the palm side, it's smooth skin. And so on one side you have hair receptors, on the other side you have minder receptors. Now, what you should remember is that some of these receptors are rapidly adapting, and we call them RAs, and some of them are slowly adapting, call them SAs. And some of them lie on the surface, okay, and they're given a number 1, and some of them lie deep in the skin, and they're given a number 2. And you've got 2 of each, so in any part of the skin, you'll have a slowly adapting receptor and a rapidly adapting receptor. Similarly, down here, you'll have both. Now, just as in vision, the size of the receptive field varies. So the ones, as you might expect, an afferent close to the surface will have a small receptive field. Something deeper in the skin will have receptive fields that are much larger. Now, we saw in the case of vision that with 3 types of cones, we could distinguish between 2 million different colors. Likewise, with the touch systems with 4 receptive fields, we can detect probably at least 2 million different shades of textures or touch features. And if we didn't have so many receptors, then our sense of touch would be like being colorblind. Now, in addition to touch, you've got other receptors in the skin, and one of them is the sense of pain. So if you cut yourself, a pain stimulus is elicited. And with pain, you have 2 types of receptors. One bigger one, and so it sends signals more quickly to the brain, and one slowly. Now, the fast one is useful for an early sense of pain because of its rapidly conduction, it gets to the brain quicker, and it's more localized. You can tell where the pain is, and it's very intense. The other one comes later. It's more poorly localized. You can't tell where the source of the pain is. And it's long-lasting and dull. Itching, if you're itching, it's these receptors that are activated, the fast conducting ones. And I forgot to mention that they're also myelinating. That's what these little tiny bumps that don't come out too good in this figure are supposed to represent. Now, when pressure is applied, your hand goes numb. Okay? That's because the conduction it fails in the nerve. But often the sense of pain and temperature as well is preserved. And that's because these small fibers are less susceptible to pressure blocks. So your hand can go numb, but from someone if you accidentally stab yourself by picking up a knife by the wrong end, you'll still feel pain there. Now, pain, there's a gate control theory of pain that these two scientists, half a century ago, put together, and it still largely holds. And they suggested it's a balance between how much signal your large nerve fibers are sending and your small nerve fibers are sending. And if there's more large than small, then no pain is sensed. If, on the other hand, more small than large, then you sense pain. So remember, the small ones are the ones from your pain receptors. And that's why sometimes rubbing, when rubbing, you activate the touch receptors themselves, not the pain receptors. And they then will block your sense of pain, or alleviate it at least. Now, besides pain, you have receptors that are either sensitive to cold or to warm, but not to burning or freezing. Those are temperatures that will elicit your pain receptors. Now, you've got these receptors activated, and they're sending action potentials to your cortex. And how does your cortex know what the afferent is that's being stimulated? For example, here, these repetitive action potentials could be because there's something happening again and again and again, setting this afferent off. Or it could be that this is a slowly adapting receptor, and just one continuous pressure is producing this train of action potentials. It could be that it's something small, close to the skin surface, or it could be something big, deep in the skin surface. So how does the brain know these various possibilities? So the brain has to know, for example, that a certain stimulus is coming from the rapidly adapting afferents, the ones on the close to the skin surface, the RA1s. Now, the way we think the brain does this is similar to the internet. We have people sending information, and here we have people receiving information. They all go down the common lines, get from one to the other. And the way that's done is that when you send a signal, there's an encoder, and it tells who that packet of information is coming from and who it's going to. So here you can see a color coming from this guy, and it's going to this guy. Similarly, color identifies that this packet of information is going to this guy. It's a tag or a label that's being placed. Now, in the case of touch, it does the same thing, but in a different way. It sends a signal along a private line. So the hair afferents send their signal to a place in the cortex that only receives a hair signal. The pains ones travel to an area of the cortex that only receives pain stimuli. And so you need a lot of lines. That's why you have a thick spinal cord that sends a signal from your skin surface to your brain. Now, how do you attach that label to that private line? Well, first of all, there is a private line, and there's cortical neurons that activated each time, a group of cortical neurons activated each time a particular receptor is activated. And you learn which it is largely by practice, experience. So as a young child, you feel things and you notice that things that feel smooth are smooth. Or things that are some things are colder than others and they're metallic. Other things are warmer and they have a different substance that it's made of. So it's experience that allows you to. And some things that you touch are painful. So you might think it's kind of odd that a particular afferent being activated gives you this feeling of a particular quality to touch. But we'll find out in a few weeks that the auditory system, everything you're hearing now, also behaves the same way. The fact that you hear something at a low frequency is because a certain group of afferents are activated and they're sending their signal to a particular group of cells in your cortex. And then something that's high-pitched, a violin or something like that, is being played, that activates another group of neurons, afferents, and the same group of neurons in the cortex. So it's not that unusual that we find that this place coding or tagging works for not only touch but also for many other systems. So in summary, what do each of these receptors do? Well, if this one were activated, you learn with time to recognize that it's a local flutter, perhaps an insect has landed on my hand. If this one is activated, it's a very fine vibration, and we'll find out that in a minute that it's very good, these fine vibrations, for figuring out what textures are. This one is slowly adapting, but it's on the skin surface, so it has these small receptors fields. So it's good for giving you that something's an edge. When that dice was picked out, the fact that there were indentations on it. They're little small little indentations, but they produced an edge each round indentation, and the finger recognized that. And these ones here, they're deeper in the skin, they're slowly adapting, and so they give a continuous, rather continuous frequency whenever the skin is stretched. And that's useful for something like in the finger. When you take your finger and you bend it, the skin on the outside surface is stretched, the skin on the inside surface is compressed. And so the firing frequency changes for these SA2 receptors in different parts of your skin. And you can tell then what position your finger is in from these receptors. And by having, let's say, receptors from two fingers, you can tell how much the fingers are apart, what the gap is between each of your two fingers. And if you know that, you can determine how thick a coin is, whether it's a dime or a loonie. So these are amazing things that the brain can do with signals from this. And finally, our RA2 receptor is something diffused that's tapping, from a large area in the hand or skin. Something like a pencil tapping, or you're holding a power tool that's vibrating. Okay, so I mentioned that the RA1 receptors, the ones that are on the skin surface and activated by vibrations, are useful for texture. So all of you have a little table beside you. Rub on that table and notice how you can tell how smooth or bumpy it is. You can find little scratches as long as your fingers are moving. You stop moving your fingers, the sense of texture disappears. The same thing will happen if you touch some part of your clothing. As you rub your clothing, you'll notice that the texture of your clothing. If you stop the rubbing, it disappears. It's because these vibrations no longer happen, and the rapidly adapting afferents stop firing. Okay. It's kind of, you should try this thing. It's amazing how it does fade immediately when you stop rubbing. Now, what's the pathway that these signals follow to have their own little private line? Well, the pathway that touch follows is this dorsal column medial lemniscal system. It's called the dorsal column because the afferent comes and enters the spinal cord and then goes up a part of the spinal cord that's called the dorsal column. Dorsal because it's at the back of the spinal cord. Okay, it's the back end of the spinal cord, this is the front end. And the one indicated in the darker color here is where all your cells are, so that's where your connections are formed. And the lighter area is where the fibers are, the fibers that travel up the spinal cord. And you notice that lights went out briefly, that this afferent doesn't make any stop here in the spinal cord. The first place it makes a connection in the structure called the dorsal column nucleus. That's in your neck region. And then it crosses over and travels up something called the medial meniscus. That gives it its other part of the name, dorsal column medial meniscal. And then travels up to the opposite side of the brain to the thalamus. This part of the thalamus, that's not important, just the fact that the thalamus is important. And then to the cortex. And the part of the cortex, then if that came from your arm, it would go to the arm area of the cortex. And that would be the stage where you'd be conscious of some sort of signal coming from your skin. Now, when signals enter the spinal cord, the ones from the leg take up the most medial position, most inside one, because they enter first. And then as the trunk enters, so that's a higher fiber, the spinal cord gets wider and additional afferents go up the spinal cord, and then your arm travels up even a more lateral position. So you're beginning to see here that you've got an organization of your body parts within your spinal cord. Okay. The other signal, that was touch. The other signal is from your temperature and pain fibers. And they're following a slightly different pathway. It's called the anterior lateral system. Anterior because it travels along the more anterior part of the spinal cord. And again, and lateral because it's anterior and lateral. Now, this pathway is different because, first of all, it makes a synapse here, unlike the other one. Then it crosses over and travels along this part of the spinal cord, the anterolateral part. Again, hits the same part of the thalamus, and again hits the same part of the cortex. So the place where you feel pain is adjacent to the place you might feel touch. Now let's look at what happens in this dorsal column. Now, why do you have a synapse here? It's important to know that for the sense of touch, that's the first synapse, or I put the wrong place. Why do you have synapse here in the dorsal column? So, again, the question was, why is this a relay nucleus? That is, just takes the signal from here and sends it to the next synapse? Or does it actually do something here? And in fact, it does very important things within this dorsal nucleus. So the signal coming out is very different from the signal coming in. And there's three things that it does. The first thing is convergence. So you can see here an afferents coming from the skin on your back. And you can see many of them synapsing onto a single dorsal column nucleus. So you don't need many of these to represent a large area on your back. In contrast, from your thumb, you have one afferent coming maybe to one or a few dorsal column nuclear cells. So it's something like in the eye. The fovea is like your thumb, and the skin on your back is something like your peripheral retina. There's differences in how many neurons are represented. So in the case of the eye, there's many neurons coming out of your optic nerve to your thalamus because you have very little convergence from the fovea, and the opposite from afferents in your peripheral retina. Okay. Give me your arm. I want to be able to touch your arm and your thumb. Okay? So I'm going to press, you're not going to be looking at this, but I'm going to press your skin like this, and you'll be able to tell me whether there's one or two things, and the same thing for your finger. Okay? But now close your arm, or your eyes. So, the collisions have bigger ones.
Is that two?
Yes? You weren't sure, eh?
No.
Amazing.
Two?
Yeah. Oops.
Two.
Okay. Oh, adjust it.
One.
Mm-hmm. That was right.
One.
That was two. So this is about the distance that started failing it. So, okay, now let's try the same distance on your thumb.
2.
Okay.
1. 1. 1.
That's actually 2, but that's pretty close together. You almost can't see them in terms of the difference. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so we saw how the receptive fields were indeed different on the finger to further up the arm, and the receptive fields would be even larger if we did examine the back. Now, where else might they be small? Where else might you find yes, the lips have very small receptive fields, as does your tongue. But you can tell, little things about your teeth by examining them with your tongue. Okay, so that was the experiment that we just did. What other things go on? The other thing that goes on is all these receptors don't have an antagonist around. You press them, they start firing. You stop pressing them, the firing rate stops. But these DCN neurons have this center surround receptor field. And you also have some with the opposite, but for the time being, for this course, we'll just consider it this way around. So you can see here, all the ones in the center hit this DCN directly. So this direct connection is all positive. All these ones in the surround hit another DCN, which then projects to this DCN by an inhibitory interneuron. Okay? The same for this one over here. To another DCN and to this one by inhibitory interneuron. In such a way, you produce this inhibitory surround. And this is like we saw in the eye. And the purpose of what we saw in the eye is to help us put rows of these together and be able to detect edges and to be able to do to have those edges accentuated. Now, you might have noticed that when you have something tickling, it's important that tickling be done by somebody else. Okay? It's very hard to be tickled by yourself. Now, the reason for that is that another signal to the DCN comes from your motor cortex, and it's a crawling discharge telling you that you, in fact, are moving. So, for example, when I'm doing this compression, in fact, a lot of the signal is being blocked because the brain is less interested in signals being produced by myself than it is by signals being produced by something else. And this blocking is done by this thing called the presynaptic inhibition. That is, it doesn't synapse on the DCN neuron directly, but synapses onto an afferent, the end of the afferent axon. And so it can block one receptor individually. And it does that for a rather unknown reason, but perhaps it can be more focal in what it blocks. So we saw that the signal coming in is different from the signal coming out, and there's three differences. Differences in convergence, and so that results in distortion of the representation in DCN. So the skin of the back has a small representation because many neurons converge onto a single neuron, whereas the skin in your thumb has a big representation because only a little bit of convergence. And then we have lateral inhibition, so we get edges accentuated, and we have cautery discharge, which gates some of the signals that you yourself are producing. Now let's look at what happens when you get to your cortex. Now you get to your cortex along something called the Postcentral Gyrus. So we have, remember from the lecture on the association areas, that you have something coming down the middle of the cortex, dividing the frontal from the parietal, called the central sulcus. So this is something just behind the central sulcus. And we have here a complete map of all your body parts. So your toes curled in on the medial side of the brain here, and then your hand, and finally your chin and your tongue over here on the lateral side of the brain. And again, you can see the same distortion as I described in the DCN. You've got a big thumb representation, and this is supposed to be the shoulder here. It's a very small shoulder, and even smaller back. Again, somebody mentioned that the lips have a big representation, and so does the tongue. Now, phantom limbs, if for some reason you have cancer or some other problem, gangrene, or an accident, you lose a limb. And so there was a patient that had lost a hand, an arm, all the way up to the shoulder. And sometime after, a year after, he complained to his doctor that he felt his hand in his cheek. Okay. There was his hand was there, still there, but in his cheek instead. And why is that? Why could that be? Well, the brain is not static. Okay? And this patient, when he lost his hand, okay, that representation shrunk. But at the same time, his face area expanded. It expanded into what used to be his hand area, or his arm area. And so, but there are still maybe a few connections that hadn't been taken over. And for that reason, his non-existent hand, he felt signals coming from it. And sometimes these signals can be painful. I've lost my sense of touch or pain and temperature from my legs, but I still get a lot of pain signals coming from my legs. And that can be very debilitating. It's hard to focus in sometimes on writing a lecture when you have these pains. Hard enough not to take too many pills that block that pain. Okay, let's look at another feature of this cortex. Another feature of this cortex is that you don't have one map, but 4 parallel maps. So here's one slice through it. Okay? It's through the area that represents the hand. I haven't quite drawn it correctly because this thumb area could be huge. But so ignore that little mistake. So you have an area here called 3A that we'll cover in the next lecture. And we have another area called 3B. That's the area that receives our affluence, okay? all the afferents that come into the brain from touch enter this way. And then they go to area 1 and area 2, and finally over here in the parietal cortex area called number 5. Now, area 3A will find out codes the things under your hand, the muscles and joints in your hand, whereas here the skin surface of your hand is being represented. Now, these two areas, 3A and 3B, that's where the afferents enter. And so it's much like V1. V1 is called V1 because that's where the signal from the thalamus enters the visual cortex. And then these two areas in turn receive signals from these two areas. And so they're higher order areas, something like V2 and V3. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that you have a mirror-like behavior. That's one of the reasons I drew the hand this way, so it's more easily recognizable. So it's done in size. So you can see the thumb, the palm portion of the hand is here, as it is in the area 1. The other thing is that this area 1 gets a lot of the signals from here that are rapidly adapting surface receptors. And so this area is important in recognizing texture. Over here you have an area that receives a lot of signals coming from these SA2 receptors. And again, those receptors are important in estimating what your joint position is, and that in turn is estimating good at telling you what the size of a coin is by its thickness or the shape of an object. And then these signals get put together and sent to the parietal cortex and detected as objects. The other thing to notice is that the receptors here are coming from the DCN, so they have these circular surround receptor fields. And in areas 1 and 2 also, you have receptor fields that are larger, more complicated. The ones in area 1, again, can detect edges of a particular orientation. And you can see here that these edges are going across several fingers at a time, so that you're combining receptor fields from 3 or 4 of the fingers. And you're detecting that they're moving in a particular direction. Over here, you put everything together and you recognize what the object is. So this is what our volunteer was using to recognize that something was a coin, or he misrecognized it, or did recognize a chair, and several other objects. Now, if one looks at area 3B, one finds that one has, it has columns in it. Oops. And this one didn't pop up as I had hoped it would pop up. But if it expands this your diagram, you find little columns, each one representing a particular afferent. So a hair afferent in one column, an SA2 receptor in another column. And that's where your labeled line ends up, okay? Each column is that receptor's own area, own labeled line. Okay, let's move on to the sense of taste. Taste is represented, of course, in the tongue. So the tongue, as we mentioned just before, is sensitive to touch and temperature and pain, so you know those qualities. But it's also a chemical analyzer, so it can detect the concentration of various chemicals that exist in the food that you consume. So there are 5 basic qualities: bitter, sour, salty, sweet, and umami. That's a new one that was just discovered, maybe 10, 20 years ago. Now we have these receptors all over the tongue, but primarily not in this middle region. And also the front of the tongue has a high concentration of sweet and salty receptors, and also umami receptors. And the back end of the tongue has more receptors that are sensitive to bitterness, and the middle here, ones that detect a level of sourness. And sour and bitter is sort of a difference in quality. Now, as we sip something like wine, or as we taste most things, you first things happens, you activate these things, and then as the substance flows down the tongue, you activate these and these. So you get, in wine, for example, you will first get a sense of its sweetness, then its sourness, and then if it has any bitterness. And so the signal takes time to go down the tongue. So you have a temporal sense of signal. But also that temporal signal is correlated to which afferent is being stimulated. And we'll see in a moment that's activating different parts of the taste system. So it's spatial as well, spatial, temporal. Now, sweet, sourness, and saltiness detects particular levels of a particular atom, hydrogen or sodium. These other ones, bitterness, sweetness, umami, they use more complicated G-coupled proteins receptors. And they also, what makes the eyes receptor, light receptors, very sensitive. Now, umami is activated by monosodium glutamate, and what gives taste, it's bacon or savory taste. It's measuring how many amino acids, and they're important in terms of the nutrition value of food. So each receptor is like a lock. Each receptor is only opened up by a particular type of stimulus. And so for sweetness, for example, only a certain molecule will activate that sweetness receptor. And the flavor chemicals people are trying to come up with all kinds of sweet molecules that look like the sucrose one, but don't have any nutritional value. Now, all these receptors are contained all over the tongue in a structure called the taste bud. And this bud contains many cells. Each cell is sensitive to one particular quality, like its bitterness. And it's surrounded by these supporting cells. Now, over time, a supporting cell becomes a taste cell. And over time, you lose a taste cell. So these are being continuously replaced. And they're being replaced because being on your tongue is actually a very dangerous place for any receptor to be. And you want these receptors to be sensitive to the food that you're eating. And they're dangerous because you do things like drink very hot liquids, you eat food that contains very spicy food, and with food comes a lot of bacteria that can produce, that can kill cells. Now, these afferents from the tongue go down these various nerves, and they hit this nucleus of the solitary tract. And you can see that each part of the tongue is going to a different part of its nucleus, and then to a different part of its thalamus, and finally to this part of the cortex called the insular cortex. And here you have a rough map of the tongue, and each one is coming along sort of a labeled line. We call each of these receptors. One's for sodium, one's for hydrogen, all coming along their own line, as in all kinds of countries. Now, with taste, you have something like an inborn hunger. Most of us can keep our sense of diet by eating things that taste good, because we have this urge to eat. Our need for eating salty foods stems from a time when salt was not plentiful. And so we have this urge to eat things that are salty. We also have an urge to eat things that activate this umami receptor, because it contains lots of proteins, which are good for you. But also, there are things in your environment that may not be good for you. And at the beginning of the century, there was kids that suffered from lead poisoning. And for a long time, they weren't sure what was causing this. It turned out that many of these kids suffered from a dietary deficiency in calcium. They didn't get enough milk. And so they try to compensate for this deficiency by trying to eat the plaster in the walls. And unfortunately, the plaster in the walls was painted with lead-containing paint, and that was what caused this poisoning. You have also genetic deficiencies. So again, all the receptors are powered by different genes. And so you might have a certain gene missing. As a consequence, you can't taste certain tastes. For example, some people can't taste the bitterness of cabbage. You also get taste aversions. Again, you have an innate aversion to taste for things at the back of the tongue, bitterness and sour. And you can see a young child, when he's given a sip of wine, there's a look of disgust if you offer to a young child a sip of wine. That's because that was associated with something that was poisonous or spoiled. Often in rats, they added a tasteless poison that caused nausea. And then that rat would be conditioned to avoid that particular food. The same thing can happen to you if you go to a restaurant and you happen to eat something that is spoiled. You'll get food poisoning, and you, as a result, develop an aversion for that type of food. And it's something that is bound in your brain. I remember as a young child, I overate on honey, and then I couldn't stand honey for at least a decade or two. And so, but it's not classical conditioning, because in the restaurant, for example, you don't develop an aversion for everything else associated with that food. The music is being played in the restaurant, or the people that you're with. Okay, the last one we'll cover. I know it's getting a little late. We're past the hour mark, but this won't take too much time. This is the oldest of our senses, that is sense of smell. And in combination with taste gives food its flavor. And with time, the sense of smell decreases as you become old, for a variety of reasons. How did I do that? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, got back to it quickly. Okay, where was I? Yes. So that could also lead to weight loss. Often, with an exception, I still love food, and as a consequence, I don't have any weight loss. Okay, how does it work in there? Well, you have odors, things that you smell, like a perfume. And an odor is composed of a mixture of many molecules. Like a perfume, it takes a lot of science to develop perfume. And each of these molecules have a particular shape. So you can see here, molecules flying around of different shapes. And they're being absorbed here. You have the mucus at the top of the nasal cavity, and it's going into these cells. And these are olfactory cells. They're being dissolved here in this mucus. I think they're trying to travel up, and they're entering these mitral cells. And those mitral cells are in this part of the brain called the olfactory bulb. And they travel through the skull, these little fibers. This is bone here at the top of the nasal cavity. And sometimes what happens here is, if you're playing football or something like that, your brain can move quickly because you're hitting something. And all these fibers are sheared. But that's not the end of your ability to smell, because these fibers will regrow in a few months. Like in the sense of taste, the fibers replace themselves. Again, because it's a fairly toxic environment. Now from there, information enters something called the piriform cortex, where you have mixtures of various odorants, and so each one of these gets activated and then mixed together here, and you start recognizing whether it's this perfume or that perfume. And then it goes to the amygdala, where you get a sense of this smell is pleasurable, or this smell is unpleasant. And to your hippocampus, which causes it to enter your memory, and also the structure here, the orbitofrontal cortex, which we'll cover more in a moment. In the orbitofrontal cortex, this signal here is joined by other afferents, by other signals coming from other areas. Your areas for taste, your areas for touch, the pain stimuli from your tongue, and your vision. So you've got a lot of different afferents come together to give you this final perception of flavor. And it's a multimodal input coming from all these afferents. And if you have a lesion of this afferent area, you have trouble. You're unable to detect or discriminate odors. Now, these afferents signal traveling up to the microcells is unmyelinated. And the signal takes time to go down this fiber because it is unmyelinated, but it's short. And speed is not important in this system because first of all, it takes time for these molecules to travel in your nose. It takes time for them to dissolve and enter the mucus at the top of the nose. And then it takes time to travel down this afferent. Now, when we sniff, okay, a bunch of molecules enter, and again, we get this pattern over time of afferents being stimulated. This temporal pattern again. It's important within each sniff to detect what that smell is. And this signal memory is important. We need to remember it, but conversely, an odor can evoke all kinds of memories, strong memories. Now, is there a basic smell qualities that we saw that there are a limited number of taste receptors, only a limited number of receptors giving us vision? But that's not the case here. We have over 300 receptor types. I've drawn only 3 of them here. Okay? But imagine that instead of 3 different colors, there are 300 different colors. And they're randomly distributed all throughout this top of the nasal cavity in a random sense. Now, each of these receptors have a different shape. There's ones that are triangular in shape, other ones here I've drawn as a square, other ones circular in shape. And the reason for that is these molecules have different shapes, and each one then fits in a different receptor. Now you notice that some molecules can fit in 2 receptors. This one here, its end fits in this one, but its head fits in this one. So a single molecule activates several receptors. Now, there are also genes that determine which receptors are formed, and so you can have genetic defects that, like color blindness, produces a sense of smell blindness, which the term for that is anosmia or anosmia. I'm not very good at pronouncing it. So there's a map of smell in your olfactory bulb, and that's because you don't have a somatic representation of your nose cavity, but a map of smells here. And that's because each of these microcells get information from the same type of receptor. If you have a different microcell, it's getting information from a different receptor type. When there's damage here, but if you bumped your head again and all these were cut, these afferents would regrow, and they regrow to the same location, same microcell. Okay, the green ones are the green ones, and the blue ones are the blue ones. And so the mapping of that smell would remain even and would be replaced by these afferents regrowing to the same location. So you have a topographic representation of smell. Again, they regrow. So in summary then, both the olfactory system and your taste cells are constantly being replaced because they exist in a very dangerous environment. And both these things project both to your newer cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex or the insular cortex, and to older systems called the limbic systems. The hippocampus is one of them, and the hypothalamus is another. Amygdala is another. And these areas can be reached. This is cortical areas, like the amygdala, but they're being reached without going through the thalamus first. Okay, that's it for today.